Through others, we become ourselves. Carl Jung. Powerful words, yet also a warning that cuts deep into the fabric of human connection. Relationships shape us, refine us, and often mirror back parts of ourselves we cannot see alone. But here's the hard truth. Sometimes the very people closest to us use that closeness to control, to drain, to bend us into something we are not. Not every request is innocent. Some come dressed as love, loyalty, or care, but in reality, they are quiet steps into manipulation. They may seem small, even harmless at first, but Jung understood the hidden danger. Beneath these ordinary gestures often lie the seeds of control, dependency, and the slow erosion of the self. That is the true risk, not the loud betrayals we recognize instantly, but the subtle demands that slip under our defenses, convincing us to surrender little pieces of who we are, one request at a time. This is what Jung warned about, how manipulation grows silently, disguised as connection, until you no longer live for your own truth, but instead bend entirely to someone else's will. The question, then, is simple but urgent. How do we spot these requests before they take root? How do we know when a request is more than just a request, but a test of our boundaries, our dignity, and our freedom? In this video, we'll uncover 5 of the most dangerous requests toxic people make, requests that may sound ordinary, but are, in fact, deeply destructive if you accept them without thought. These are the traps that erode your strength, your independence, and your inner peace. And if you truly want to protect yourself, if you want to remain whole in a world where others may try to chip away at you piece by piece, then learning to say no to these requests is not just important, it's essential. This isn't about paranoia, and it's not about pushing people away. It's about recognizing the difference between healthy connection and hidden manipulation. Because once you see these 5 patterns clearly, you'll never unsee them again, and you'll never be as easy to control. One of the most dangerous traps Carl Jung warned us about begins with something that seems almost noble: the quiet request to change yourself in order to satisfy someone else. On the surface, it looks like compromise, an act of care or loyalty, but deep down it carries a far heavier cost. Jung believed that losing one's authentic identity is not just a social mistake. It is a wound to the psyche, a fracture that eats away at our wholeness. When you bend your character, your dreams, or even your mannerisms simply to keep the peace or to win approval, you're not adapting in a healthy way. You are erasing. And the more you erase, the more a hollow space grows within you, one that no amount of external praise can ever truly fill. A healthy relationship allows flexibility, yes, but never demands the sacrifice of your essence. The line between growth and surrender is subtle but critical. Growth expands who you are. Surrender shrinks you into someone else's image. That is why the first toxic request you must resist is this: change yourself for me. The second comes in an even more deceptive form: the request to ignore your feelings, to push aside that instinctive inner voice that whispers when something is wrong. Jung emphasized the wisdom of the unconscious, the messages our deeper mind sends through emotion, intuition, and subtle impressions. To silence those signals in order to please someone else is to deny your own compass, to walk blind into a storm because another person told you the skies were clear. Over time, this self-betrayal breeds confusion, resentment, and a dangerous split between who you are and how you act. The toxic person benefits from your silence because your muted instincts allow them to steer the relationship without resistance. But the cost is always yours: anxiety, numbness, and the haunting sense that you are no longer living in alignment with your truth. To protect yourself, you must practice the discipline of listening inward, honoring what you feel even if it displeases others. Feelings are not weaknesses to suppress, they are signals to decode. And then there is the third request, one that preys directly on your sense of responsibility. Take on all of my problems, as if they were your own. At first, it can feel flattering. Someone trusts you, depends on you, leans on your strength. But Jung understood the shadow side of this dynamic. The toxic individual is not truly seeking support. They are seeking to unload, to escape accountability by making you the container of their chaos. You become the emotional landfill where they deposit every fear, every failure, every unresolved issue. And while you drown in their burdens, they feel lighter, not because they grew, but because you absorbed what was never yours to carry. Genuine care does not demand self-destruction. There is a difference between helping and absorbing, between compassion and enmeshment. To draw this boundary is not cruelty, it is sanity. You can support without surrendering, guide without carrying, love without losing yourself in someone else's endless storms. Jung's insight here is timeless. When you take full responsibility for another person's inner life, you rob them of the chance to face their shadow, to wrestle with their own darkness, and you cripple yourself in the process. True growth, both theirs and yours, requires space, boundaries, and the courage to say, "I will walk beside you, but I will not walk instead of you." And so, these three requests, change yourself, silence yourself, carry everything for me, may sound on the surface like calls for love, compromise, or loyalty. But in truth, they are invitations to self-erasure, subtle contracts that trade your wholeness for someone else's comfort. Jung would remind us that the psyche is not designed to thrive under such bargains. The price of saying yes to them is not just exhaustion, it is the slow disappearance of your authentic self. And that is a cost far too high for any relationship, no matter how close. The fourth toxic request is perhaps the most dangerous because it disguises itself as love. The demand that you remain in a harmful relationship out of loyalty, history, or the illusion of devotion. Jung often warned that pathological attachment keeps a person trapped in the shadow of another, unable to grow into their own wholeness. A toxic partner, friend, or family member may say things like, "If you loved me, you wouldn't leave." Or, "After all we've been through, you owe me this." On the surface, it sounds like a call for loyalty, but beneath it lies a prison built out of guilt and fear. Staying bound to someone who consistently diminishes you is not loyalty, it is self-betrayal. Love that demands you remain in pain is not love at all. It is dependency, dressed in romantic or moral language. Healthy love nourishes. Toxic love consumes. The difference can be subtle, especially when emotions run deep, but Jung reminds us that growth cannot occur in captivity. To confuse attachment with love is to chain yourself to stagnation. The courage required here is immense. To separate genuine care from destructive entanglement, and to walk away when staying would mean erasing your chance to evolve. Leaving does not always mean you no longer care. It means you care enough about your soul to refuse its slow suffocation. And then comes the fifth request, one that is equally corrosive, the pressure to silence yourself, to swallow your truth, to keep the peace by suppressing what you really think or feel. This request often comes subtly. "Don't bring it up, it will just cause problems." Or, "Why can't you just let it go?" At first, you may convince yourself that silence is maturity, that you are preventing unnecessary conflict. But Jung understood that suppressed truth does not vanish, it festers. Every unspoken word, every stifled emotion builds into an inner weight that breeds anxiety, resentment, and eventually, a fractured sense of self. And worse, silence is precisely what toxic individuals feed on. The less you speak, the more control they gain, for your silence becomes their permission to continue unchecked. It is not anger that destroys relationships nearly as much as dishonesty with oneself. By refusing to voice your truth, you become complicit in your own diminishment. The antidote, however, is not explosive confrontation, but courageous authenticity, learning to speak with clarity, calm, and firmness. To say, "This hurts me," or "This does not work for me," is not aggression, it is self-respect. Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming whole, demands integration of one's voice, one's inner reality, into outer life. To mute that voice is to stall your evolution. And so, when someone asks you to stay in a relationship that corrodes you, or when they ask you to muzzle your truth for their comfort, they are not simply making requests, they are asking for pieces of your freedom. These are not small compromises. They are deep fractures in the foundation of who you are. To accept them is to agree to live smaller, quieter, and more dependent than you were ever meant to be. But to refuse them, to set the boundary, to choose authenticity over appeasement, that is the beginning of real strength. It is not easy, it is not painless, but it is liberating in the truest sense. Because in the end, no relationship, no matter how familiar or emotionally charged, is worth the cost of your soul's silence or your life's stagnation. Jung's wisdom calls us back again and again to this truth, that the path to wholeness is not paved with obedience to toxic demands, but with the courage to stand firm in who we are, even when it risks conflict or loss. In the end, we come full circle to the heart of Jung's warning. These are the 5 most dangerous requests you must always refuse: to change who you are just to please others, to deny your feelings and silence your intuition, to carry the weight of someone else's problems entirely, to remain trapped in a harmful relationship under the guise of love or loyalty, and to suppress your truth simply to avoid conflict. Each of these demands chips away at your wholeness, pulling you further from the life you are meant to live. Jung reminded us that the path to freedom always begins within, and that every time you say no to these toxic requests, you are in fact saying yes to yourself, yes to your authenticity, yes to your growth, and yes to your peace of mind. Strength is not about how much you can endure in silence, but how firmly you can stand in your truth, even when others resist it. So let me leave you with a question. Which of these 5 requests have you struggled the most to reject in your own life? Share your experience in the comments, because your story might be the reminder someone else needs today.